Good evening. I'm Debbie Lee, Festival Director, Melbourne Jewish Book Week. Thank you for joining me and welcome to our next episode of Writing Lives, a series of interviews in which we delve into the lives of the authors and what inspires them, as well as the books they write. Before we commence, I'd like to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land on which Melbourne Jewish Book Week is based, and whose land was never ceded. And I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I'd now like to introduce our guests for this Writing Live session. Katia Ariel is an author, book editor, and educator from Melbourne, NAM. Born in Odessa, Ukraine, she is a poet and memoirist who teaches in the School of Culture and Communication at the University of Melbourne. Katia has been published in a variety of literary journals, including Womankind, Archer, and Antithesis. She is the recipient of the Eleanor Dark Residential Fellowship at Varuna in 2022 and the Bundanon Artist Residency in 2024. Her memoir, The Swift Dark Tide, has been shortlisted for the 2024 Stella Prize. Her second book, Ferryman, The Life and Death Work of Ephraim Finch, is forthcoming with Wild Dingo Press in 2025. Here to interview Katia is Jessica Bellamy, playwright and theatre maker who has presented works in Melbourne, Sydney, Canberra, regional New South Wales, Singapore, and the Philippines. Jessica creates plays for youth and adult performers that touches on various issues including climate, feminism, Judaism, mental health, and morality. Works include A is for Apple, Thick Beats, and Good Girls, Shabbat Dinner, Compass, and Sprout. She's been a project artistic director for Outback Theatre for young people and has run workshops and residency programs for organisations including Express Media, Art Centre Melbourne, the Australian Theatre for Young People, Back to Back Theatre, and in many other settings. I'd now like to throw over to Jessica and Katia. Enjoy.
Thank you. So I'm so excited to talk to you today, Katia, and it's such perfect timing because only a week or two ago we found out that The Swift Dark Tide had been shortlisted for the Stella Prize.
Yes.
Maybe we should start with that because it is such an exciting thing.
Oh.
Could you tell us a bit about what that experience has been like for your first book to be recognised in this way?
Gosh, what's it like? It's very adrenalizing. And very exciting and a strange kind of thrust into visibility, which, to be honest, I'm never entirely prepared for. And it's this really weird thing when you write a very personal book. You write it, I think, a great power of my book is sort of how private it is, which sounds like an odd paradox, because, of course, then I went ahead and put it in the world. And so I'm simultaneously very proud of it and very protective. And so having a sort of quite public accolade is a very strange and paradoxical sensation. It's like a real push-pull of wanting to be really in the world with it and then also wanting to hide and go, oh, my little baby. So, yeah, but of course, it's like a ridiculous commendation and I'm so honoured. It's amazing.
It's wonderful. Congratulations. So, with that in mind, as you were saying, it's the first baby out into the world as a novel, but of course there's been
memoir.
Writing that you've been doing, I imagine, your whole life. And I wonder if you could give listeners a bit newer to your work an idea of your life as a writer, the pieces you've created in the past, some of what you like to focus on, what drives you, what you've done.
Okay, so gosh, I think I always wrote as a kid and I always drew pictures and I always made little illustrated books for other children and for my family and for anybody who would listen. And I was also a voracious chatterbox, would you believe? And so language and the conveyance of story has always just been kind of like breathing to me. And then I kind of shoved it underground in adolescence and in coming to Australia and having to learn a new language at the age of 10, and then starting high school and kind of just having to, I think, affix my identity to other things that felt sort of safer. And I didn't then write for years and years and years and years. And then in my late 30s, I came back to it. And that kind of happened simultaneously with falling in love with this woman who is the subject of this book, and really coming home to myself in many other foundational ways. So those kind of creative and personal homecomings all started to really happen again in a big way around the 40-year mark for me. And since then, I've been really unstoppable. It's all I want to do. I just want to write night and day. And yeah, it's really my intellectual home and my emotional home and even my bodily home. I love the physical experience of writing, of taking this electricity and turning it into this object.
That's so beautiful, and such a lovely explanation of sort of that ability to be vulnerable. And it's of course you've had an editing practice for much of your life, but it seems like an interesting stepping stone from editing other people's works and providing your literary knowledge and rigor there into putting what you want to say into the world as well. I imagine there's something liberating about all that experience now translating into your own storytelling.
Yeah, and I remember so clearly the moment when that pivot happened between being an editor and deciding that I was going to be a writer. I was sitting in traffic. I think I had one of my kids strapped in the back, and the car was just full of shopping and the usual kind of domestic clutter. And I was like stuck in a traffic jam outside that shop Lock and Load on Glen Huntly Road, which is like an arms store. It's weird. I don't know why it's there. There's never anyone in there, just guns. Which I don't know, maybe was a metaphor for the pivotal moment or not. Who knows? Maybe it's the starting gun of something.
It was released like a bullet.
Yeah. But I was sitting there just having a very kind of midweek blah. And I'd been perseverating for a long time about why editing was like, it was satisfying in a certain way, and parts of it I really loved, the kind of interacting with another human being and their creativity was really juicy for me. But beyond that, I was just feeling increasingly stuck. And so I'm just sitting there in traffic, and it really, like, it just happened in a matter of seconds. I just went, I don't want to fix other people's thoughts anymore. I want to make my own. And it just trickled through me like rain. It was so, I don't know, it's a terrible idea in books to write epiphanies as something that happens spontaneously, but this one really did. I just got it. I just went, I don't want to fiddle with anybody else's stuff. I want to make my own. I need to generate now. And that impulse to generate was so strong, I haven't been able to unknow it.
Still sitting in that image of it trickling through you like rain leads to my next question about what I think is such a distinctive style that you have. There's such rich language that you choose, but also an approachable, very grounded in human way of doing so that what I noticed the most, and I think I sent you a message upon reading your book, was that it made me want to go for walks without headphones on, because I thought, oh my God, the way that Katia sees things and hears things and notices things, how rich, how beautiful. We should all do this. And I would love to know, is that, I mean, I assume it's part of you that you funneled into craft in various ways. How do you distill that approach into viewing the world and hearing the world and all these other ways of taking in the world? And how did your form come to be, do you feel, in your style?
Gosh, that's a big question. And I think the heart of the answer is probably that it just, the only way I can write is from my body. And even if I'm not writing about something that is explicitly corporeal, the first and last way that I know it is through my body. And so then I think my endeavor is always to give it to the reader in some way through that, which may be writing sensorially, which may be about actually pointing to which kind of apparatus in me is experiencing the moment. But actually, oh gosh, at like a pure craft level, I think writing, as I said before, I love the physical experience of it. And really, it's almost like I muscle test myself as I go about the correctness of a sentence or a syntax or a notion, or when to keep spiraling conceptually or when to stop. Or, like all of that is a very embodied thing for me. It kind of only lives up here for a moment. And then I don't know, I just cultivate it with everything else, like in my stomach and in my chest and in my heart. And they are kind of like my guides, because I think it's very easy in this world to be intellectual, and we are very conditioned to think our way through things. But it's more generous to give people something from a more primal place. So I try and do both.
Yeah, there's something about a really robust vocabulary, which you clearly have, but used to evoke and to emote, not just to show that you're very smart, which we know that you are. And that's for me a very distinctive part of this work. And I think then it leads to another question I had about the general style of the book before we move into specifics. But there's so many allusions to so many different literary influences in there, whether it's mythology, where it's contemporary queer writing, whether it's Jewish writing. Are there people that you keep coming back to as guides, whether in writing a memoir, whether in your future works?
Do you know what? I just consume things really broadly. I read across genre, and I listen to music across genre, and I eat food across genre. I'm kind of just very culturally omnivorous. And I think, of course, there are authors I love and I'm inspired by, and that's just always going to happen. You form certain attachments to people's particular musicality, but no, it's more that I just, I'm always sponging in and watching the way other people are creative. And that inspires me.
That's great.
Yeah.
A good Jew is gustatorially omnivorous, of course. So.
A good immigrant Jew is always hungry. I mean, forget intellect, it's hunger, right? That fuels the best writing. It's like, I'm just looking for my next meal.
So okay, let's move into some of the themes and the movement through the book. So there's quite a lot that you set up that this book is, and I agree with it. It's all of these things. You say it's a queer love story, a story of becoming, a story of resilience, and of giving oneself permission to search, to fall apart, and to reconfigure. And also in the writing itself, you call it a map and a diary. So there's quite a lot that it is. And it makes me kind of think about the epigraph you chose from Robert Macfarlane, his piece Underland. Darkness might be a medium of vision. And I'd love to reflect on, obviously it's always a really significant choice to start a novel with a piece. What does it mean to you?
I think what it meant to me when I chose it was that, well, a couple of things, that it was, I guess, a warning to the reader that while this was going to be a romantic book and an erotic book and a book full of joy and discovery, there was also going to be darkness and there was going to be sorrow. And that the two are very much intertwined for me. And in fact, I think without meaning to, in the end, the book actually just spent the bulk of its life inside that fascia between the two. And I'm very interested in their proximity. And I think kind of chapter after chapter, what I'm doing is getting inside that proximity. So that's it. Yeah. So the darkness spoke to that, is that, of course, you know, I'm a big fan of acknowledging grief and sorrow and giving it the reverence it deserves, in all the ways that it shows up in our life. So that was number one. And number two, I think what I was speaking to there is, you know, it's a medium of, what does he say? It's a medium of vision. Is sometimes you've got to get really quiet and really dark to see properly. That actually in the broad daylight of our lives that are so cluttered and so frenetic and so busy, we often don't see properly. And I think I was sort of speaking to that to go to the deepest reaches of your own creativity, you've actually got to turn the lights off and kind of unplug from the chatter of your life, and a little bit perhaps even from the chatter of the story. It's like, you know, I remember going to a therapist years ago and relating some relational conflict in my life. And I was like, and then she did this, and then I said that, and she said, okay, Katia, you know what? I'm going to listen to this once. You can tell me the facts. And then beyond that, I'm not really interested in the narrative. I'm interested in the dynamic and what sits beneath this. And so I think that's what a darkness kind of allows us as writers and as explorers of our own lives, is to get into the deeper subterranean dynamic between the things that are happening for us. Because in the light, there's a lot of this.
Beautiful. And it makes me appreciate more and more some of the settings of caves and underwater and all these places where truth can be found without the chatter.
Yeah.
So the next area I'd like to delve into a little bit is sort of some of the ways in which this work looks at the idea of secrecy and privacy, and then the form itself of a memoir, kind of in some ways challenging those notions. So there's a few stories you share early in the book, which are sort of Greek tragedies and also kind of folk tales. There's the torment of Midas's barber who has to keep a secret, and there's the tale of a golden-haired maiden who is buried. By sharing these, I think there's a really interesting story you're starting to tell about this interplay between privacy and openness, and how it can be such a struggle to work out which side of that divide you actually sit. And I'm curious about how you have grappled with this sort of the wrestle of it all, the need to set up space and acceptance from all the real people that you're writing about, also the acceptance of yourself to be really vulnerable and open, as you said, to it's something that is your baby, but you're now sharing it with such a wide audience. How did you manage that?
Look, I'm a big fan of telling the truth faster in life and on the page. And that doesn't mean I tell all the truths all the time. I am, of course, selective about them. And especially when I'm writing about others. I mean, my children are in this book. The father of my children is in this book. The woman to whom the book speaks is in this book. My mother, my grandmother, you know, everyone who matters to me, really. And so at a practical level, to like answer your question about their involvement, I read everything to them before I put it in the book. And so I had their permission to include it. And I just couldn't have done it any other way in good conscience, really. You know, I'm not interested in exposing anyone against their wishes. That's not compelling to me, and that doesn't actually make good literature. It's kind of ethically sooty, and I don't want to do it. So I went as far as I could with the permission I had. And that to me felt like quite dynamic and quite exhilarating. And of course, insofar as discussing myself, I could go all the way. And so I did, I speak really directly about my body, about its sexual history, about difficult things that it has experienced and known. And part of that, also feels like a really political thing to me. I mean, I'm not the first female writer to talk about this, but of course, when we write these things and put them into the world and say them out loud, we are hopefully unshaming all the other women who read that and go, fuck yeah, yeah, I recognize that. And that's, that's not so shameful and so awful and so burdensome that I can't stand up and speak to it too.
There's this other fantastic metaphor you have. It's just about reflecting on after the birth of one of your children, and a certain decision you made, and what you call the nappy for the placenta being something of a social filter. Who looks at it and goes, yeah, of course, like, yeah, I'm coming. And who goes, oh, really? And it really made me think about this process of sharing the kind of the dirty laundry or the placenta, that some people find it really, really terrifying. And on one hand, there's that, and there's also the people who feel they know you now and will come and talk to you about all of their life as well. And
should we maybe, like, for the benefit of people who haven't read the book, explain what actually this is?
Please do.
Just that, when we had our second child, I had my first two children at home. So the baseline was already very hippie. And with the second, we really just did everything in such a natural way and such a hands-off, uninterventionist way, to the extent that we had what's known as a lotus birth, where we didn't cut his placenta at birth. We didn't cut the cord, I should say. And we just let it kind of stay attached to him and then fall off on its own around day 3, 4. And in order to keep it sanitary, you keep it literally wrapped in a nappy, coated in salt so that it doesn't smell. So it's all very hygienic and very sort of weirdly kosher, quite literally, you kind of kosher it. And and then we just where he went, it went. And then it dropped off. But yeah, it was such a confronting thing to so many people. They just could not cope with it, this manifestation of actual birth and an actual part of my viscera in the world that, God forbid, they should have to confront, So that's what you're speaking about, yeah. And that's really what happened when my then husband and I decided to open our marriage. It had that very same effect of either confronting people to the degree that they didn't want anything to do with us, or kind of quietly, politely tipped out of our lives. Or they just went, wow, this is a bit mad and a bit chaotic, and I don't know much about it, but I'm listening. And they kind of put their arms around it and around us. And so it was a very useful filter.
And I think even with the way in which you use it to tell kind of the story of those years, it also says something really interesting about when people are faced with life choices that are maybe not the ones they've done, or a little bit kind of tailored to those people. There can be feedback you don't expect, and I guess sometimes putting a work out into the world can generate that as well. And it is just a case of I guess how you're managing that. And it sounds like you've taken a lot of care with the people that really matter in the work, and everyone else can take from it what they wish.
Yeah. And I was so moved last week. I went up to Sydney for the Stella shortlist announcement, and there were 2 women speaking about the shortlisted books. And one of the women, Michelle Law, was speaking about my book on stage to the room, and she said something so lovely that no one has said so far that just touched me so deeply. She said, you know, I kept reading this book and I kept looking for an antagonist and there just wasn't one. She said, because everyone is written with so much love, even the people that, you know, the author struggles with. And that actually sort of brought me to tears because I worked very hard at that. You know, I think if ever there was an antagonist, it was my own fear or my own inability to appreciate life, or, you know, they are the things that I went up against. But the humans never, no matter what came to pass between us.
Beautiful. Another area that is, I mean, family is so important in this work, and I think it's the way that you write about your relationship with your mother is really powerful here. There's an exchange again. I think there's quite a few really meaningful areas where you're talking about the births of your children, and this one is sort of a moment from there as well, where you and your mum are reflecting on pregnancy and birth while you are kind of in the realm of giving birth. You
Yeah.
say she shares some of her own difficulties and experiences, and you say a part of me wanted to comfort her. Another knew that this was the moment to free both of us from that cellular Soviet inheritance, this epigenetic straitjacket for two. I think it's such a thoughtful way of thinking about many experiences, the Soviet Jew, the mother-daughter, the becoming of child to mother that happens, that kind of beautiful change that occurs.
Yeah.
And all the ways in which that relationship changes. And yeah, I'd love to know a bit more about why this exchange was really an important part of telling the story of you becoming who you are, and the role that your mother as an artist herself plays in your creativity as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you've kind of nailed it, you know, in the question, that my own becoming was in a really large part to do with individuating away from my mother, with whom I've always been incredibly close. We're really close in age. She had me when she was 19. And we are very soul close, and we're very constitutionally similar. We're both feelers, and we're both, you know, kind of, you know, there's like fusers and separators, to put it like very reductively. We're both fusers, and, you know, we're both creative, and we're both incredibly maternal. And yeah, there's almost like a kind of a historical twinship between us that I really had to break the back of to become someone else's parent. And yeah, I think the scene you're speaking to is when I'm actually in the birth pool, clutching the edges as I'm kind of laboring. And yeah, we have this conversation between contractions where I look at her and I just see this incredible sorrow, and almost like I saw like a very young child in her eyes in that moment. And I knew that she was letting me go too, and that we were both really letting go in a big way in that moment, so that this new person could arrive. And, you know, the new person that was me and the new person that was the baby that was emerging from my body.
Yeah, wow. I think while we are talking in some ways about this cellular inheritance that we both share as Soviet Jews,
Yeah.
there's another part of the book where you are touching on how unique that experience is, which not necessarily a lot of other Jewish people will be aware of, that that sense of what you call Jewish, pagan, communist, atheist, pragmatist self that you are, particularly living in Odessa, singing Yiddish songs at weddings, but then also shoving a Christmas tree into the living room / bedroom that is part of every home.
Yeah.
And then you kind of go into more detail about what some of that cellular inheritance actually is, which is heavy psyches joined in one long knotted brow. um, and I really loved pretty much every time you went into that sort of identity. You mentioned that it was strange to find a Russian superstition that portended the positive, because it is very rare. It's always don't
Yeah.
whistle inside, don't open an umbrella inside, don't point at someone with a knife. I'm sure you've got so many of your own, and some of them are in the book as well. But then you also ask in this very hopeful, liberating way, and this is a beautiful quote that I'll try to read as well as you wrote. What does it take in a life naturally replete with peril and heartache, the mixed dictatorship of drudgery and chaos, to open the door and step outside, to the phosphorescent night sea, the heat waves and migrations, to the dancing and the romance, while the bombs are dropping and the city we have left behind turns to ash. So from charting this course and writing it out, what do you think it does take for, in particular, this sort of superstitious, injured people that we are, to manage this progress, I suppose?
Oh gosh, that's kind of like the probably, if there is a central question to the book, that's it, right? So it's a big one to answer, and I hope I didn't answer it too neatly. You know, in the book, I hope I never resolve anything too neatly. In my writing, what does it take? Gosh, I guess it's about coming into relationship with fear, which exists, like, I mean, I can only speak to myself, but exists in me in a cellular way, in a daily way, in a culturally conditioned way, in a kind of, yeah, in a spiritual way, in a mundane way. I just see it everywhere. And I'm actually scared of a lot of things a lot of the time. But I think one of the beautiful inheritances actually is also a kind of fortitude in the face of that just, you know, that I really got from my mum, which is just an insistence on doing the thing anyway. And the older I get, the stronger I think that muscle becomes. Just do the thing anyway. Because, you know, I think there's a bit quite close to what you just quoted in the book, where my mum relates a dream to me, that she has this vision where an older Margarita speaks to a younger Margarita, and she says to her, don't worry, just don't worry, because the things that are going to really kick your ass in this life, the things that are going to really break you, you can't forestall them, and you can't guard yourself against them anyway. And everything else, you can just participate. You can just keep participating in your own life. So I guess it's just, I don't know. I don't have a great philosophical wisdom to add to this, other than it's important to show up in your own life.
Yeah, there's probably only one continuation of this idea of what it is to grapple with fear itself, which you do have another really lovely moment where you're talking with your mother about her fears about your life and what's happening in your life, and you telling her that it's okay to be scared, or you might know the words themselves.
That's right, because she says, she's watching my marriage just completely kind of invert itself, and she says to me, I'm just so scared. And in that moment, I think it would have been very tempting for me to say, oh, don't be scared, Mum. It's okay. I'll do better. I'll fix it. I'll be calmer. I'll be less of a maniac. I'll work it out. I'll hold the fort. But I think in that moment, what came out of my mouth was a kind of an even more helpful truth. I just said, so be scared. Be scared, because I'm scared too. But actually, if I don't see this through, this other great love that has just bloomed in my life, that is actually speaking to something without which I cannot breathe, if I don't do that, I will live a life of quiet desperation. And trust me, nobody wants that, neither I nor you. Because if there's one thing worse than living in panic, it's just living in a kind of soul atrophy, and I will not do it. And I think my mum, who loves me very much, stepped into that with me.
there's this really lovely sense you set up on that note of what do we owe all the people who came before us who could embrace what they wanted or perhaps couldn't, to be our truest self and to follow what we know we need to be or what we need to do. And I think the way that you dance with this idea of expectation alongside actually what I don't owe them is the correct way. What I owe them is the liberation and the freedom and the truth, is such an interesting way of looking at it, because we always have these tropes of the kind of the good Jewish girl and doing right by, and I wonder, I think writing that would be quite liberating, but also really scary as well, let alone living it, of course.
I mean, it's all speculation, isn't it? Like, how do we know what our ancestors really want for us? I think it's a lot of it is projection. And I think I just somewhere in me made a decision that what my immediate ancestors, at least the ones that I have in living memory, just wanted me to be whole and just wanted me to be happy and just wanted me to grab life by the tail. So, you know, maybe that's a very convenient reading of things, but I just went there.
Beautiful. So we've delved a bit into kind of the ins and outs of psyche. So I think we'll move into a few other areas of the book. So one bit that will be clear to anyone who starts reading is that there's a reference to animals, animal kingdom, the animal within, the animal instinct, impulse that is there throughout the book. It's right at the beginning, and you dot it in these beautiful ways throughout the story as we move through it. The focus on animals, not just what they want and what they need and what they seek, but also kind of some of the struggles they have. You talk about like the moth in the cocoon and the fact that birds are spurred to migrate through an actual physical pain in their body.
Yeah.
What made you land or settle on that being on the animal kingdom being this source of literary inspiration to tell this story?
Okay, so that was completely not something I plotted or researched or even, you know, embedded deliberately. I just think animals are so, what they're like, you know, the way what I was saying about the body before, you know, the body doesn't lie and animals don't lie. and I think in a way we may be smart, but they're wise. And they were often giving me the wisdom that I was sort of, some kind of primal instinctual wisdom that maybe I was ignoring by getting very heady and getting very up here and trying to work out how to live my life. So it was almost like just, looking to them as archetypes, as examples of behavior and of survival, right? Because that's what instinct is. It's a compass for survival. And I guess that's why, animals made sense to me.
Another great sort of theme that's there throughout is the idea of disobedience, not only alluding to the film, which I'd love you to speak to in a moment about how revelatory it was for you to watch that film and
to just look at Rachel Weisz for 2 hours. It's pretty good.
But you do also bring in just the idea of disobedience in your life. In some ways it's sort of metaphorically a kind of idea of running away with the circus, or hearing the lights and hearing the sounds and seeing the lights of the circus. And I'd love for you to just talk a bit more about sort of disobedience as a sense of freedom, of discovery, what it means to you.
Gosh, well, again, I mean, I think it speaks to snapping out of that straitjacket that I was raised in for the first decade of my life in the Soviet Union, which was all about obedience. You know, it was about kind of a daily obedience for me as a school child, and a very demanding level of social obedience for us as Soviet citizens. So, I mean, I didn't I haven't plotted my life as like an intentional up yours to that, or as a rebellion to that, but it just so happens that yeah, I mean, this book is it's in large part it's about giving myself permission to follow my desire. And that was something that I acquired over the 4 decades of my life. I was not born knowing how to do that. I learned to fight for it. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
It does. And I guess for listeners less familiar with the film, there's scenes in it that you speak about how they're just the erotic power of seeing these Jewish women who love each other. That yeah, I guess that discovery and is a film that everyone should watch.
I think it's a very beautiful film for many reasons. I mean, the one thing I will say is that it sadly contributes to the canon of like all lesbian relationships are doomed to fail canon, that thing, which I think that ship is slowly turning around for us. But yes, it does have kind of this great, intense love that then cannot be. And I think that belongs in something kind of now archaic and very frustrating to me. So that's the one drawback. But otherwise, it's a gorgeous film about well, desire, really, I think, and the perils of stepping into that fulsomely for a woman of that community.
And it does, I think what was significant about the film is that there's not a whole lot necessarily of literature out there that speaks to the specificity of the experience that you were navigating in a way. Like the Swift Dark Tide needs to exist because there is no unique story like this except for yours.
Well, I mean, I think there are other coming out stories. There are many, many on the market, and I've edited them and I've read them. But yeah, I hope that I told mine in my way. That's all you can do, right? Is you can just write things with your voice. And I hope that that's what gives it its singularity, is that, of course, I am not the first woman to come out in the middle of her life. But I hope that the tiny tiles I used to present that mosaic are unique.
So we've just got one more sort of area touching on this idea of writing about sexuality and also the body. There's quite a few moments in the book where you're engaging with sort of body dread as you tell your story of coming out at a different age, I suppose.
Yeah.
You talk about the migrant body and how different it feels in Australia. The puberty and how shocking that can be to a sensitive person, and then the onset of sexuality in ways that are kind of, I guess, expected but not necessarily wanted or learned for.
A runaway body.
Yeah. And yeah, I think there's what's so notable is that when you write empowered and really beautiful sensuality, it's so it rips off the page. But then on the other side, there's the stories you tell that are less thrilling, I suppose, less exciting. How it's such a kind of a huge spectrum of experiences that you're writing about in this book. How it must have been a bit of a really challenging, even stylistic way of showing the literality of really unempowering sexuality versus landing in who you're meant to be. And I'd love you to speak to that. And then also, I think you may have some writing that sort of reflects on some of that, the coming out part of yourself.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wanted to write everything sensually, you know, the delicious and the ugly. And because I think that's part of how I built the bridge to my reader, is to, as I said, to give them something from my bodily memory and from my corporeal experience. And I am very interested in writing good queer sex. I think the planet needs it. I think. So yeah, and again, it's a political thing for me. It's making that desire visible and navigating the many beautiful and exquisite contours of it. Oh man, that may be the most lesbian thing I've ever said. But it's something that I've worked at a craft level. But also I think I delivered really intuitively, because for me, again, it was about just reclaiming my body and reclaiming permission and all those things that I gave away with and without permission before I really stepped into who I was. It's like I was grabbing them back and hoarding them with the writing of this book. It was like I'd found all the chests of treasure that had been stolen from me. And now I was just sitting there with my arms around them like this, just kissing all the gold,
Beautiful. Would you like to read a short passage from the Swift
Yeah.
Guide? Yeah, let's do that while we have a little bit
Sure.
more time.
I'm actually going to read a little passage. It's just, yeah, it's not very long, but it's kind of from the middle of my book, and it's when I discover that, like I come out to my mom and I tell her I'm in love with this woman, and she really embraces me and is so beautiful and loving about it, even though she's very frightened and kind of like, what does this mean for your life? But instead of shunning me, she turns to me and she says, okay, well, let me tell you about your grandma. And she tells me this incredibly eye-opening story about the way that my grandma was also a bit of a wild thing. And so I just want to read that little passage about where I am at that juncture in the story, because I think it radiates out to a lot of the book, if that's okay. And so the book is also in second person in a lot of its chapters. And so this is me speaking to the woman that I am in love with. I am fascinated by my grandma, electrified to know that someone in my immediate lineage also went through this terrain of the raw and hungry heart, of claiming the unconventional. Thinking about her, I become selfish. A year into my relationship with you, a year into this demanding phase of my marriage, I want to ask her for a map. Even if its place names are in a foreign script, its edges curled with time travel and the agitation of curious fingerprints. I need a guide to surviving this vertiginous space. This space where there are so many rules and sometimes none at all. Where the one governing principle is also, I love him and also you. I want to live with my family and also sleep on a houseboat in Amsterdam with you until I am very, very old. I want to be the boss of the barnyard that is my domestic life. I want the warm beds and the noise and the pyramid of mismatched shoes, and to be daily ambushed by the swollen, unguarded hearts of my 3 growing beasts. I want to cook mountains of food and tie knots in superhero capes and answer philosophical questions about Moses and the burning bush with attendant marijuana jokes from the teenager. And also, I want to live in an almost silent house with you, where there is a holy amount of natural light and a monastic absence of things. I want the walls to give us warmth, the garden to be our music. I want to sleep deeply and wake up to your smell first. I want to find you with my nose and love my way into you without opening my eyes. In our house, I want you to, need you to, like I need the vitamins of a raw thing, to bleed every month on our sheets, in our bed. And I want to soak them in cold water and hang them to be bleached by the sun, and to listen to them snap like the sails of a yacht while I sit inside and write to you day after day.
Well, if that doesn't get people running to buy a copy, though I think we need you to record the whole thing so we can hear it in your voice. I suppose then the only final thing I'd like to ask is once anyone who hasn't yet read The Swift Dark Tide devours it, they will be very keen to know about your next work, which I understand is in motion. Would you like to tell us in whatever detail you're able to at the moment, a bit about it and what we can expect?
Yeah, so I have just submitted the draft of it to the publisher, and it is a biography of a very important and beloved community figure who was the director of the Melbourne Chevra Kadisha for 30 years. And he recorded many of the stories of the families that he took care of. And I interviewed a lot of families of deceased for the book, and I have been sitting with him for about a year and a half and interviewing him, and getting to know his vocation as a death worker, as an archivist, as a community figure, as someone who provided solace and love and practical assistance and spiritual advice and 1,000 very special things to people year after year after year. And so I've had the incredible privilege of entering into that space and trying to write his life. And that's the next book.
Wonderful. And that will be sometime in 2025, we can...
Yes, I believe so. I think we're looking at early next year.
Wonderful. Well, Katia, it's been such a pleasure not only to have been able to read this a couple of times to prepare to talk to you, but to hear you reflect on it so powerfully. So thank you so much.
And thank you for your beautiful, thoughtful questions and your incredibly close reading. It's just such a treasure. Thank you.
Thank you both. And I would totally agree, Jessica. The Swift Dark Tide is a book that you can't put down. And as I think I put in our newsletter, you are literally borne along this swift dark tide when you open it. But when I first received it, I just flicked through, and every page, it didn't matter whether I started at the beginning, the end, the middle, I was drawn in. It's that kind of a book. You can pick it up and read any section of it and just feel the force of it. So truly sensorial, truly physical, truly visceral, truly corporeal, all those words you used to describe it, Katia, at the beginning of the conversation. It deserves every bit of praise that it gets. I'm so proud of you for the Stella shortlisting. Let's see what happens on the 2nd of May, but this is an amazing achievement in itself. Thank you both. It's been wonderful to listen to the conversation. Thank you.